Well, it's been 8 weeks of talking about Sesame Street. 8 weeks since I first asked why it took until Abby Cadabby's debut in 2006, 37 years after the show's debut, for a female Muppet to truly be as important as the boys. And you knew I was going to say this, but 8 episodes later, I'm not sure if I'm any more confident in my answer. We've had some clues along the way, but as we've discussed, this is not exactly a question with a simple answer, and every question leads to 30 more. At the very least, it is a good excuse to talk about some characters who don't usually get fan attention. So there's that, you know? This episode marks the end of my first season, in which we covered most of the recurring female Muppet characters introduced on Sesame Street prior to 1980. These characters were, of course, Betty Lou, Roosevelt Franklin's mother, Granny Fanny Nesselrode, Prairie Dawn, Franny, Smart Tina, Suzetta Something, Tina Twiddlebug, Tessie Twiddlebug, and Rodeo Rosie. That's not everybody introduced in the 1970s, as I know some of my listeners are thinking. Early in this series, when it was time to plan everything, I made myself a chronological list of every recurring female Sesame Street Muppet, so I know exactly who I skipped. First of all, I know I skipped family members. During this period, Granny Bird appeared once in Season 1, Grover's mommy once in Season 3, Snuffy's mom, Sally Snuffleupagus, in one episode in Season 4, Cookie Monster's cousin Monster, not really the most creative name, appeared twice. Oscar's niece Irvine, who was called Irving in the 70s, appeared a handful of times, but more often in later decades. The Count's steady girlfriend, Countess Natasha von Numeral, is probably the one of these who appeared the most on the show, but she definitely fits into this category too.
Dear, please, say you will marry me and become my countess.
Oh, Count, you are very romantic, but I cannot marry you.
Oh, that's one. One time I've asked you to marry me, and you've said no.
No.
We will be talking about these characters in future seasons, but I'm going to have to tackle most of those family members a little differently. In some ways, many of these characters are more like accessories to the male cast than distinct people, which makes their roles a little different to discuss. So we'll get there, just not this season. I also skipped Gladys the Cow, and let me assure you, that is not because Gladys the Cow is unimportant.
Well, why don't you take over?
Oh, could I? Oh, well, why, thank you so much.
Hey, where are you going?
Well, I've got to join my friends, my backup group. Yes, hey, fellas, we've got a gig. Excuse me.
Gladys is basically my second favorite Sesame Street character after Prairie Dawn. She's going to need a special, in-depth episode, and I'm going to need some time to plan that. And then the 1980s begin with Grungetta, so we'll be talking about her next season too, and wait, hang on a second. My notes say 1976 introduces a character named Winnie Wiggins? Who is Winnie Wiggins?
Well, hi there.
Hi.
Well, why, my name is Winnie Wiggins. Nice to meet you.
My name's Maria.
That's an M word. Did you know that? M, Maria. That's the first M word I heard today. That's a really nice M word. I like the way it starts off your name. Maria.
Yeah, that's terrific, yeah.
Hoo boy. Alright, I guess we're not done here. We've got work to do this week after all. Plus, we'll catch up on some things we missed regarding Granny Fanny Nesselrode, Betty Lou, and Prairie Dawn. I'm B for Becca Petunia, and you're listening to the Season 1 finale of P for Prairie Dawn Companion.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Starlight Hotel takes great pride in presenting the world's favorite 6-year-old entertainer, Miss Prairie Dawn!
Come on, girls, girls,
Okay, so Winnie Wiggins. The thing about Winnie Wiggins is that I've never been more certain that a character stopped appearing because people didn't enjoy her. I mean, I guess I can't say that for a fact. No one said it in any reliable sources, and her performer, Richard Hunt, sadly passed in 1992. But Winnie Wiggins only appeared 4 times on Sesame Street, plus 1 background cameo and 1 single book appearance. That means the only character we've discussed all season long with fewer appearances is Franny. The only reason a character would appear that infrequently is if nobody involved with her wanted to keep her around. Especially since, unlike many characters, you can't say that Winnie Wiggins was pointless or nonsensical. So who was she, and what did she do? Well, Winnie was a lavender, live-hand anything Muppet, just like Granny Fanny Nesselrode and Rodeo Rosie. She had gray hair and a baggy cardigan, like a stereotypical, eccentric, elderly woman. Like Granny Fanny Nesselrode, but a different, almost identical, eccentric, elderly woman. And as I said earlier, Winnie Wiggins had a very specific role on the show. Mrs. Wiggins was the superintendent of 123 Sesame Street.
Mrs. Wiggins, I was just wondering whether or not you began to put the hot water heater in yet.
Hot water heater.
Yeah.
Well, no, not yet. But speaking of hot water heaters, hot heater, 2 H words. 2 very nice H words.
Yeah.
Come very handy when you need hot water, you know.
Yes, Mrs. Wiggins, but maybe I should tell you where it goes.
Goes! Oh, there is a G word you can follow anywhere. G, goes.
It goes, Mrs. Wiggins, it goes right over there in the basement. Okay?
Basement.
Right.
Basement. Do you hear that way? The way that B just falls right into that word? Basement.
More specifically, Winnie is the kindly, bumbling, neat freak superintendent of 123 Sesame, Oscar's Trash Can, and apparently several other buildings on Sesame Street. There are so many storylines they could have built out of that, and we did see some of them. Winnie makes the hot water heater too hot. Winnie helps Maria clean her apartment. Winnie and Oscar clash over whether things should be neat. You can probably imagine other Winnie scenarios that could have had real narrative, educational, and comedic value. But I'll tell you, they definitely aren't comedic because of Winnie's other gimmick that you heard a little bit of in that earlier clip. Winnie Wiggins is basically Count Von Count, except for letters instead of numbers, even down to the fact that she's got the same anything Muppet base as the Count.
But instead, I think perhaps I will have some duck. Yeah, there's a nice D word, duck. Roasted duck, that is. And, then maybe perhaps some dates. There's a good, dependable D word, dates. Yeah, and dill pickle. D for dill. Yeah. D for dill. Dill pickle, maybe. And, I don't know, for dessert, maybe some Danish and donuts. D for Danish and D for donuts, too.
Which is like, okay, the Count's gimmick of obsessing over counting is funny because of Jerry Nelson's performance. On its own, it's annoying. I mean, it's kind of supposed to be annoying, right? We see adults and other Muppets constantly get tired of him. But it's an entertaining performance because Jerry goes all in with it, with that hilarious accent and that extremely maniacally unhinged diversions that happen when the Count gets stuck counting.
That is 278 incredible, colossal credits. I love motion pictures. Wonderful.
Winnie Wiggins is, I'm hesitant to use this word, but Winnie Wiggins is subtler. She's not subtle, but she's more natural in that she's just an old woman who kind of rambles. It's not the Count. It's a worse version of Granny Fanny Nesselrode who likes the alphabet, which is also something that Granny Fanny Nesselrode liked. It's so weird to me that there's a Richard Hunt character who isn't funny, because his stuff is always among my favorites. I mean, I already said Gladys the Cow is my second favorite Sesame Muppet. But Winnie Wiggins just isn't funny. Anyway, in the Sesame Street cookbook from the 70s, she makes some kind of alphabet cereal casserole. I'll make it one day. And that's all I could ever say about Winnie Wiggins, which explains, really, everything about her. Okay, so let's check in on some of those other characters. Firstly, ToughPigs reader David H., aka Splurge, deserves a radish for finding some scans from the From Here to There coloring book, the 1978 coloring book that featured Granny on a unicycle on the cover. Now, I can conclusively tell you that a lot of this coloring book is about Granny Fanny Nesselrode. The Sesame Gang are competing in a race, the From Here to There race, and we see Granny on her unicycle several times in the book. She's got fans cheering her on, and she's knitting to help her keep pace, saying, knit 1, purl 2, knit 1, purl 2. She wins the race and reveals that what she's been knitting was a scarf that says, Granny is a winner. That's a lot for a character I guarantee 99.99% of kids were not excited to see for a second. Okay, is that enough Granny Fanny for you? Let's shift gears to two characters we're never going to be done with, Prairie Dawn and Betty Lou. I've been saying this is the 1970s season of my show, but if you've been listening, you know that I frequently go beyond that window. For instance, last week, Rachel Garrett Steele and I discussed Rodeo Rosie book appearances from as late as 1992. That's because, for characters with only a few appearances, it makes sense to knock them all out in one episode. But Prairie and Betty stick around for decades and decades and appear in so many sketches, so I was never going to be able to get through every single one of their important appearances in a single episode, nor would I want to. But at the risk of falling behind on them, I want to take some time this episode to address some other notable things they did in the 70s. Again, when it comes to those two, I'll never cover everything, but I'd be remiss if I ignored them completely. So, when Stoph Shear was here in episode 2, we talked about how Betty Lou wasn't much of a character at all. While there are a lot of additional Betty Lou sketches I could discuss from the 60s and 70s, there isn't much to say about any of them. She once wanted to read a book.
Oh, look at that! A great big book!
That's the thing about Betty Lou. She's not usually much, but she's always around. Stephanie D'Abruzzo couldn't remember whether she had a consistent performer in this era. And folks, Stephanie D'Abruzzo remembers everything. But in episode 2, Stoph and I settled on a brief period of consistency where Betty Lou was defined by her unexpected love of the grotesque before she simply became a girl who's nice, if she showed up at all. As the 70s went on, her lack of appearances become even more noticeable. As far as I can tell, she has 2 starring roles in books for the rest of the 70s, and they're merely starring roles in short stories that make up larger anthologies. In 1978, in the Sesame Street bedtime storybook, she appears in the story Betty Lou Lends a Hand, written by Emily Pearl Kingsley with art by Tom Cook. This is definitely what I knew Betty Lou from as a little kid. And you may remember this is also how I knew Rodeo Rosie. In this story, Bert wants to show his friends an envelope he just got in the mail, but it blows behind a fence. Each Muppet tries to use their signature talent to get the letter, to no avail. For instance, Harry Monster, who's the strongest, tries to lift the fence, and Sherlock Hemlock, who's the smartest, tries to look for clues. This is when Rodeo Rosie tries to use her loudness to yell at the envelope. Remember? That Rodeo Rosie, she sure made a lot of sense. Anyway, eventually Bert asks Betty Lou to try, and she succeeds in grabbing the envelope through a crack in the fence because she's the smallest. The end. That's Betty Lou's starring role. She saves the day not because of any notable personality trait or attribute she's worked on, but because she is small. This is nothing. It's actually less than nothing, because Betty Lou isn't even the smallest one in this story. Prairie Dawn is also in this story, and in an extremely literal way, she is the exact same size as Betty Lou. Truly, this is the most boring way to make Betty Lou a main character. In the same year was a better attempt. In the classic Super Grover comic anthology, The Exciting Adventures of Super Grover, also by Kingsley with art by Joe Matthew, Betty Lou appears as the star of a one-page advertisement parody. That's right, it's an old comic book, so there needs to be a parody of a Charles Atlas ad. And who's a better wimp than the so-called 98-ounce weakling Betty Lou? In this ad, Betty Lou is bullied at the beach, just like Mac was in the original Charles Atlas ads, and as in those original ads, she dreams about getting swole to take her revenge. Things sort of diverge from the original ads when Betty Lou realizes very quickly that getting revenge like that seems pretty boring. "Gee, I'd rather play football," Betty Lou yells. The comic ends with Betty realizing the best way to solve her problem is to tell the bully that he isn't being nice, and the bully apologizes. There's some fun stuff in here. It's building off of the same thing as that last story we discussed, that Betty Lou is the smallest, but throws in that fun twist of her being full of contradictions, that Staff and I were talking about, by having her love football. It also has some fun stuff with Betty getting extremely angry, vengeful, and then assertive, all things we don't usually associate with little girl characters. I love this comic so much. It could have been a really fun angle for Betty Lou as we move into the 1980s. But, spoilers for next season, it wasn't, or at least it wasn't consistently. But if anyone was getting more consistently angry, passionate, and assertive, it was Prairie Dawn. Looking at these late 1970s books and records, you can see just how well defined her character was becoming. Prairie's role was to be more competent than everyone else, very aware of her self-worth, and impatient with other characters' silliness. Sometimes in the Muppet fan community, we say that Prairie Dawn didn't really develop a strong character until the 1990s, but I'd argue it's all right here, albeit mostly in transmedia material, all right here in the late 1970s. Here are some highlights. As I told my pal Rachel when discussing Tales of Sesame Gulch by Ruth Anna Long with art from Tom Cook, Prairie Dawn shows up in this alternate universe as the main character of the short story Prairie Dawn of the Pony Express. Here, during a mail run, Prairie is kidnapped by a group of Anything Muppet bandits. But Prairie isn't scared. Instead, she's frustrated at how terrible these bandits are. And if I can do my best Southern accent, which I guess is my best Rachel Garrett Steele impression, if this ain't the sorriest looking gang of owl hoots I ever did see, says Sesame Gulch Prairie Dawn. Turns out the bandits kidnapped her because they wish she'd deliver mail to them, and Prairie thinks this is ridiculous. She's frustrated, but then she teaches the bandits that they have to send mail to get mail. It's really good Prairie material. She's a teacher who wants what's best for her students, but a teacher who absolutely also gets frustrated with her class. We see that again in 1977 on the Sesame Street fairy tale album, where Prairie teaches Grover that fairy tales don't have to end with marriage after being frustrated by his simplistic, trope-filled storytelling.
Wait a minute. That's ridiculous, Grover. Why should she marry the prince when she never even met him? What if she didn't like him? Why couldn't she just go back to her castle and ride her horse or open a lemonade stand or learn to read instead of getting married?
But Prairie Dawn, fairy tales always ended like that, with everybody getting married and living happily ever after.
Oh no, Grover. There are lots of fairy tales that don't end like that.
Really?
Of course. Would you like to hear one?
Certainly, I am most curious.
All right.
It's Prairie Dawn as a feminist, and let's remember that character seed because it's going to show up again. In 1978, on the album Fair is Fair, Prairie Dawn sings I'm a Person, a song about how she has feelings and interests that go beyond her just being small, the direct opposite of the lesson of Betty Lou Lends a Hand.
I'm a person, even though I am very small.
This year, we also see Prairie in the same two books as Betty Lou, The Exciting Adventures of Super Grover and the Sesame Street Bedtime Storybook. And folks, it really seems like Emily Pearl Kingsley loved writing for Prairie. I should really reach out to her. Producer Joe, let's reach out to Emily Pearl Kingsley at some point. Can you write that down for me? Anyway, in the Super Grover book, Prairie is starring in the school play of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, and Grover is starring in his occasional role of ruining Prairie's life. Apparently unaware what plays are, Grover is convinced that Bert, Harry Monster, and Ernie are real bears menacing Prairie Dawn, and flies in to save the day by taking them to the zoo. Prairie is obviously furious with Grover's hijinks. It's that Fran and Frank dynamic played out on paper rather than in fleece. It's exactly the dynamic we want for these two characters, and it's beautiful. And the best part is, there's no doubt of Prairie's passions and priorities when she grumbles, "Now I'll never get to be a star," in response to Grover destroying everything. Her friends being in the zoo? That's secondary. Prairie looks out for number one, and I adore that. And of course, if you've been on the ToughPigs Discord, you know that one of my favorite emojis to use is Frustrated Prairie, a kind of blank, office-style look into the camera of Prairie Dawn in her pajamas. And that comes from the Sesame Bedtime Storybook. Here, Prairie is once again tortured by Grover's naivete, as her friend doesn't understand how bedtime stories work. In other words, there's a character here. In basically all her starring appearances, We know exactly who Prairie is. She's strong, she's funny, she's often relatable, and yet there isn't much of her. As we've said, she's barely on the show in the late 70s, save for some re-aired pageants. Prairie Dawn is an important character in the 70s. Just to reiterate my initial point on this show, maybe not as important as the boys. And you know, as we're here at the ending of season 1, I think that's so important to address again. What was Sesame teaching girls in the 1970s when so many of these characters were basically non-existent? And the one who did exist was largely appearing in books, not on the show itself. You know, Stephanie D'Abruzzo talked about how she was told, again and again, that boys won't watch shows about girls. And I've seen the data too. You know, my favorite book, Hearth and Home, discusses the same thing. But I'm still struggling with that. Because despite what Rodeo Rosie might believe, Sesame Street isn't Gunsmoke. Sesame didn't exist simply to sell products during commercial breaks. It's supposed to be teaching kids. And shouldn't boys learn that girls have strong personalities too? That girls can be fun? And don't girls deserve to learn that too? Obviously, I think Sesame does a better and better job of this as time goes on. We mentioned this, you know, I mentioned Abby and Zoe and Rosita and Gabrielle and Ji Young and Neve. Well, maybe not Neve, because as far as I'm concerned, Neve is non-binary, but we'll get to that in like 5 years or so. But anyway, the 1970s? The 1970s are just leaving me feeling cold. You know, there's one important thing Prairie Dawn did on the show in the 1970s that I didn't talk about. It's a street scene that never re-aired, and one that's so hard to find that we only seem to have footage of it in black and white. In episode 401, from Sesame Street's third season in 1972, Prairie Dawn is excited about her carpentry kit and thinks that maybe she wants to be a carpenter when she grows up. This is obviously not a job we typically associate with women. It's not considered a feminine job. But Molly, the human mail carrier with a short tenure on the show and a loud singing voice, tells Prairie Dawn that she shouldn't let that get her down. And she belts out a song that will become one of the main Sesame Street standards.
You know, I think I want to be a carpenter when I grow up. Do you think I can?
Do I think you can?
I sure would like to.
Oh, you can be what you want to be. See what you want to see. Believe in yourself. Just believe in yourself. Oh, you can go where you want to go. Do what you want to do. Believe in yourself. Just believe in yourself.
Folks may say you're different, that you've gone and lost your senses, but the world is yours to walk in. Go ahead and leap the fences, and you'll see. Believe in yourself, and the world belongs to you and me. It's a feminist anthem, folks. The you and me is women and girls. Believe in yourself will be used in other contexts later on, but in its first appearance on May 8th, 1972, it's about this. And I hope kids of all genders watching the show understood what Molly meant and what Prairie needed to hear. Girls matter just as much as boys. Girls can do anything, no matter what other folks say. And you know, this season, I hope you all learned that. I mean, I hope you already knew that, to be honest. But as you might have noticed, this season all of my guests were women. All different kinds of women, with all different jobs and passions and interests. Puppeteers, obviously. We talked to a couple puppeteers. But also writers, composers, artists, clowns, actresses, human rights advocates. Young and old, transgender and cisgender. But we're all women, and we're all important. And you know what? I'd like to think, regardless of your gender, you all found us worth listening to. And I don't know. I guess in my heart, I hope that the viewers of Sesame Street could feel the same way about women. I like imagining a world where women can do what they want to do, so long as we believe in ourselves. I hope that when I come back next season and look at Sesame Street in the 1980s, we see a world where the Muppet characters better reflect that. I know that Sesame kept trying, and I know one day the show will succeed in this. Now, if only the real world could succeed in this too. Thank you for listening to Season 1 of A Prairie Dawn Companion. I want to thank you all for taking the time to join me on this journey. This project has really been a dream of mine for years, and it's been so wonderful to finally bring it to life. So I want to take a second to thank everyone that I usually thank in the end credits. So first of all, thank you to my executive producer, Joe Hennes. Without you, this show really couldn't exist. I want to thank the Muppet Wiki team, especially Scott Hanson, Tony Whitaker, and Shane Keating. You guys really helped me with the immense amount of research this show required. I especially want to thank Tony and Shane, who helped me find so many of the rare clips required, often at a moment's notice. Every girl needs a squad who'll find Winnie Wiggins clips for her at the drop of a hat when she realizes that she'd forgotten to talk about her until the last episode of her podcast's first season. I want to thank Michael Davis for his irreplaceable book, Street Gang, which really helped me get a picture of the early days of the show, even if Michael Davis and I have distinctly different opinions about Zoe. I want to thank my crack team of beta readers, Michal Richardson, Katilyn Miller, and Eli Lee. These folks were especially useful on the early episodes, when the premise really needed to be hammered out, and it was so good to ask 3 of the most talented writers I know if I was making any sense at all. Shout out to Michal for suggesting the title, A Prairie Dawn Companion, in the first place. And of course, an extra special thanks to Eli Lee, who repeatedly put up with me needing to ignore them so I could read 16 picture books about a cowgirl with teeth. Thanks to all my friends who appeared as guests. Staff Shear, Christy O, Drake Lucas, and Rachel Garrett Steele. You gals are so special to me, and I'm so glad you could share your passions and knowledge with the world. And of course, thanks to Fran Brill and Stephanie DeBruzzo, not only for appearing on my show, but also for bringing Prairie Dawn and everyone else to life. And while I'm at it, thanks to the entire team at Sesame Workshop for creating a special show and letting me create my own project about it. Thanks to my family at ToughPigs. Thanks for making a space where shows like this can exist. And thank you at home for listening. Please, if this show was interesting or fun or taught you something, please rate and review it on your podcatcher. But more importantly, tell a friend. Also, I guess I can say that you can find me on the ToughPigs Discord or on Blue Sky at Tall Girl Petunia. Say hi. And in conclusion, I want to remind all the women and girls of the world that you can be anything, because you really are quite remarkable.